I miss theaters. I miss the big screen, the big speakers, the big tub of buttered popcorn that you're probably gonna regret eating in a couple of hours, but most of all, I miss the audience. Audiences are the secret ingredient to unforgettable movie-going experiences, and I will never forget sitting in the theater and listening to the audience's reaction to this scene from Skyfall.
What's the regulation to cover this? Well, first time for everything. Yes.
What makes you think this is my first time?
See, good filmmaking is like an inside joke. That's why scenes like this get such a big reaction. It's putting an idea into the audience's head and letting them fill in the blanks. This scene isn't funny because it's telling us that James Bond porked some dude, it's funny because it's implying that the most womanizing character in movie history might have porked some dude at some point. You could also say this scene is queer-coded. Queer coding refers to characters or situations that are not explicitly queer in the text, but heavily implied to be so through performance, characterization, editing, costumes, etc., etc. As a storytelling device, coding is often used to crack jokes, establish character dynamics, and slip in representation under strict censorship guidelines. Most of the time, though, it's a combination of all three. Queer coding has become a big talking point in film criticism and queer theory over the last several decades. Frequently cited examples include Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca, Joel Cairo in The Maltese Falcon, and pretty much every Disney villain ever. But today I wanted to talk about queer coding in a genre that doesn't get a whole lot of airtime in this conversation. Spy movies.
And your little, whatever, gay innuendos don't even merit a
Reach around.
Spy fiction is the gold standard for coding and innuendo because both are necessary tools of espionage as a profession. To be a spy is to play a part, to code your identity and intentions so as to gain trust, information, and sometimes, yes, sex. So yeah, if you think about it, spy movies are kind of the gayest genre.
Let's see who ends up on top.
Now, not every piece of spy literature is interested in exploring sexuality, much less homosexuality, but the most important ones are, and 007, inarguably the most important piece of spy literature ever, has been queer coding for about as long as James Bond has been making sex puns. Which is to say, about as long as he's been around.
Hi, I'm Plenty.
But of course you are.
Rosa Klebb, the main antagonist of 1957's From Russia with Love, is very much implied to be a lesbian. The relationship between the two assassins in Diamonds Are Forever has strong gay undertones. And then, of course, there's Silva. So we're noticing a pattern here, right? Like, aside from that one crack in Skyfall, every queer-coded character in James Bond has been a villain. Huh. It's almost like we live in a society that, demonizes homosexuality. What a thought. For real though, movies have a long and storied history of using queer coding to get us to dislike a character, and unfortunately, spy movies are no exception.
I win. What do you say to that?
This is a tricky topic when it comes to queer theory because one could argue that bad representation is better than no representation at all, but you could also say that the more audiences come to associate homosexual behavior with bad behavior on screen, the more likely they are to associate the two in other people, or even themselves. That's how homophobia works. But times have changed. We've become more tolerant as a society, and that means we've seen a broader and more diverse range of queer-coded and even explicitly queer characters in modern spy movies. Take the villains, for example. If you wanted to queer-code a movie villain back in, say, I don't know, 1960, you could usually go one of two ways. If your bad guy is a lesbian, she's a stuck-up, ugly old spinster who hasn't gotten laid in decades. And if your bad guy is, well, a guy, he's essentially just the opposite of James Bond. Where Bond is sexy, masculine, and no nonsense, your villain is foppish, feminine, and flamboyant as all hell. Of course, we're a lot smarter now than we were back in 1960. We know that queerness is by no means a bad thing, and that not every queer person looks the same. Just look at Villain L from Killing Eve. Yeah, I know it's a TV show and this is a video about movies, but you know what, it's my video, I can do whatever I want. And Villain L is a great example of queer coding. She's heavily coded as queer in season 1 and more explicitly queer in later seasons, but unlike Rosa Klebb, she's young and beautiful and unashamed of her own sexuality. Sorry, Ian Fleming, but not every lesbian looks like your shitty headmistress from Catholic school. On the same token, not every gay villain is some eccentric queen with a Napoleon complex. August Walker, the primary antagonist in Mission Impossible Fallout, is arguably more masculine than our hero, but that doesn't stop the movie from coding the hell out of him.
You're not getting rid of me that easily, Hunt.
I mean, the guy literally looks like a Tom of Finland drawing. There's no way this wasn't intentional. Hell, if we're talking about TV shows, there's that whole episode of Archer where the bad guy's gay and he's played by Timothy Oliphant. Timothy Oliphant.
I don't mind taking in the view when the scenery is so pretty.
All this to say, if you're queer coding a bad guy in a movie nowadays, they're not bad because they're queer. Villanelle isn't a psychopath because she's got a thing for Eve. If anything, it's the only thing about her that makes her feel human. And we're not supposed to dislike Agent Walker because he looks like he wants to have sex with Tom Cruise in every scene. We're supposed to dislike him because he wants to destroy the world. But we're still running into this issue, aren't we? I mean, why are the gays always trying to destroy the world? Are there any good gay spies? Is that even a thing in these movies?
What are you gonna do now? Throw a bit of furniture?
For your information, I was gonna take this chair and turn it sideways and shove it right down your throat.
Of course you were, because that's your answer to everything. Smash a hole through every problem in a massive truck. But that's not gonna work here.
I think it'll work fine.
Guys, why don't you two take a seat and we'll talk through this?
Like I said, times have changed, and that means a greater openness on the part of spy movies to queer code the spies themselves. 2019's Hobbs and Shaw, for example, is exploding with sexual tension.
Phrasing?
Sorry, teaming? Teaming with sexual? No, that doesn't sound any better. Essentially, if Vanessa Kirby weren't there to flirt with The Rock every 5 minutes, he and Jason Statham would have definitely gotten it on by the end of this movie. I would also venture to say Armie Hammer and Henry Cavill would have Call Me By Your Named It in 2015's The Man from U.N.C.L.E. had it not been for Alicia Vikander and her womanly ways. Wow, Henry Cavill keeps coming up in this essay. I wonder why.
Looks like something a gay guy designed in a laboratory.
Anyway, queer coding is all over modern spy movies, but it's like half-ass queer coding.
Hey, phrasing!
Like, these characters are obviously telegraphed as queer, but there's always a third-wheeling attractive lady there to add a level of plausible deniability. It's almost as if these movies are scared of the suggestion that our two hunky heroes might have a thing for each other, even as they are constantly, and I mean constantly, suggesting it. So all of this brings us to Tenet. And before you say it, yes, I know, Tenet is a weirdly sexless spy movie, but a queer reading of the film reveals it to be something of a response to all of the stuff we've been talking about here.
Blimey.
First, let's take a look at our villain. Andrei Sator is your typical spy movie bad guy. He's rich, he's egomaniacal, he's Russian, he's got a big scary weapon he wants to destroy the world with, he's Russian, and he's very, very eccentric. He is also probably the straightest person in the whole movie. At the very least, he's the only man whose sexuality is ever specified in the text, which, as we know, is something of a departure from most spy movie villains. Also a departure, the relationship between our James Bond character and our Bond girl. Kat and the protagonist develop a strong friendship over the course of the film, but it's just that, a friendship, totally platonic. In the rare instances he does flirt with Kat, it's usually in plain view of Sator or his henchmen, and usually as an attempt to bait him.
Just tell me if you've slept with my wife yet.
No. Not yet.
If anything, Sator is the one being seduced here, except in like a weirdly toxically masculine way. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Tenet seems to feel about heterosexuality the way most other spy movies feel about homosexuality. Something to be feared and resented. But what about homosexuality? We're not told any of the characters in Tenet are gay, but many fans of the film have suggested that the character of Neil is queer-coded, and, well, I don't mean to say straight guys can't have impeccable taste in scarves, but
that part is a little dramatic.
Say what you will about Neil's wardrobe or his penchant for long romantic stares, but there's an inherent queerness to his arc in this movie. When Neil meets the protagonist at the end of Act 1, they hit it off instantly, establishing a trust and a companionship which transcends literal borders. Neil is MI6 and protagonist is CIA, but also the more metaphorical borders of their given profession. As the film goes on, both Neil and the protagonist are thrust into situations where they must choose between the mission and each other, but they always have each other's backs. Finally, in Act 3, Neil reveals that he and the protagonist have been friends for a long time. Vis-a-vis the whole time travel gimmick, we learn that after the events of the film, the protagonist goes back in time to recruit Neil, and they become,
They seem to be very good friends.
See, Neil is very much a traditional movie spy, i.e. someone who is coding their identity and intentions, someone who is playing a part. But whereas James Bond is always a secret agent playing the part of a lover, Neil is the other way around. In order for him to do his job and save the world, he's got to conceal his feelings towards the protagonist for the entire movie, and if that's not a queer narrative, then I don't know what is.
We get up to some stuff. You're gonna love it. You'll see.
Being a queer fan of spy movies has always kind of sucked, to be honest. It sucks to always be empathizing with the villain, it sucks to watch your identity be used as a punchline, it sucks to have to watch the guy always end up with a girl, and it sucks that no one is ever actually queer. They're just implied to be. And that's really important because everyone wants to see themselves on screen. We want to be told that it's okay to be who we are, that the things that we feel are real and true, and at their best, movies give us an excellent space to practice those emotions. Yes, even the big dumb ones where The Rock punches a guy with his head. And that's why Tenet felt like such a revelation for so many queer fans. I mean, sure, it's still coded, but here's a spy movie where the villain is straight, our heroes are obviously in love, and none of it is ever played as a joke. I think it's a huge step forward for a genre with a spotty track record when it comes to representation. I only wish I got to see it on a bigger screen.